Hey, this is Mark, and this is episode 31 of the Why Are We Still Doing This podcast. Before cell phones, what was the first thing you did when you woke up in the morning? Those of you with severe phone addictions, what were you doing the second you opened your eyes before you had a cell phone? Before cell phone addictions, you'd wake up, look out your window, listen to the birds outside maybe, and probably go at least 10 to 15 minutes before you turn on the TV to watch the morning news and have some sort of information thrown your way. Now, let's talk about how I'm waking up at 45 years old. Now, I still use an alarm clock I've had since college. And no, it doesn't have any fake wood paneling anywhere on it. And I refuse to use the regular alarm because it's just the absolute worst way to wake up in the morning. An obnoxious siren at a piercing decibel. That's how alarm clocks were for decades. It took decades for them to finally be like, maybe we should add the option for the radio to come on. I exclusively use the radio alarm to wake up, and it's usually something like NPR or classical music at a reasonable volume. But sometimes the radio alarm gods shine down upon you where your alarm goes off right at the beginning of the chorus to an intense rock song, and it's like a scene straight out of an 80s teen movie. Alarm goes off and it's, everybody's working for the weekend. And then you have that burned into your brain for the next 2 hours. You're jumping out of bed, late for school, probably going to get another detention, just like in an 80s movie. But now, for a lot of us, the first thing we do when we open our eyes is reach for our phone. And we have literally nothing important that we need to check when we reach for it. There's literally nothing that needs attention the second you open your eyes in the morning. Some people like to know what the weather will be. Sure, you got to know if you need long or short sleeves. But for a lot of us, there's nothing good that's going to come out of scrolling social media the very first thing in the morning. Because social media knows how to get you riled up. Social media knows how to make you jealous. Social media knows how to keep you scrolling social media. It's like 24-hour cable news stations. They know how to get you to keep watching. Without a doubt, they've got a stranglehold on my parents' generation. Walk into any boomer parent's kitchen at any time of the day, and I bet everything that I own that cable news is on the TV in the kitchen. And the volume is past 50%. Generally, the news should be boring. But when you have people constantly talking about things that you should be watching out for in the world, it makes you want to keep watching in hopes of a solution. Imagine waking up and the first thing you see on social media, the first thing you see is an advertisement for a clinical trial for a rare disease. It's a disease you've never heard of. And after seeing it, you go, I wonder if I have that. Or, I wonder if I'll ever get that. Before the internet, you would have never heard of that disease before, especially first thing in the morning. You would have never heard of most diseases before the internet. Life was good, especially for overthinkers, catastrophic thinkers, and neurodivergent people. But now, after seeing that advertisement, some people may research the disease for an hour, looking for something that will appease their mind, that they don't have the disease, when in reality they will never find the answer they're looking for, or be content with for what they find, or some just might have it in the back of their mind and not think about it. But it's still there. It's now found a place in your brain and will occupy space without you really even knowing it. A lot of times with social media, we absorb other people's problems without even realizing it. We see a post on social media by someone we barely know, someone we met twice in college, post about how their 4-month-old son was diagnosed with some incurable disease. On the other side of the spectrum, we see one of our friends who lives on the other side of the country post about how their car is still in the shop and not ready yet, and they have to go to work but have no transportation. We absorb both of those problems in different ways. We can donate money to help this person who has a child with an incurable disease that will undoubtedly have medical bills, transportation, food-related bills that go along with caring for someone with a serious disease, but we carry that with us. In a non-social media world, we may not even know about their situation given the loose connectivity of the relationship with this person. Now, I'm not saying we should ignore this situation, but back before social media, we probably wouldn't have known about it. Same thing with the woman whose car was not still repaired. Even though that post she made does not affect us in any way personally, we still read it, we felt the struggle she was having, and it was something our brains had to process. And we might carry it with us for days at a time. There's nothing we can do about it, but it's just an unfortunate situation that we've now processed and now stays with us. And that is what is bad about opening up your phone the second you open your eyes. You're bombarded with information. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. You're still taking it in. For some people, they just can't handle it. Some people's brains work where they can only take in a specific amount of information per day or engage with a specific number of people per day before they're tapped out. Social media often keeps us up to date with everything that's going on in our friends' lives, to the point that when we actually see them in person, we have nothing to talk about. If you have a friend that posts about every minute detail in their everyday life, by the time you see them in person, the conversation is like, so I brought my car in for this noise, and I know. There was a mouse that made a nest under the engine cover. I saw your Instagram post about it. I've literally had 2 alarm clocks in my life. One that I got when I was probably 9 years old, then was gifted a new one before going away to college. Not sure why I was given a new alarm clock or who gave it to me. I don't remember going out and buying a new one myself. I can't remember if my original alarm clock stopped working. But someone buying a new alarm clock as a gift is kind of strange. Like, what a shitty gift. That's something that most likely everyone on the face of the earth had before cell phones. I don't know a single person in my life who has said to me, I'm in the market for a new alarm clock. I've never known anyone that suddenly had their alarm clock just stop working. They seem indestructible. Why couldn't they make televisions and other appliances out of the same materials alarm clocks are made of? Why stop there? Why not make automobiles out of alarm clock parts? They'd run forever, right? There was nothing wrong with the alarm clock I had before receiving a new one, and there was no new technology that would help me with the wake-up process in college in this new alarm clock. Maybe this new one I was given had a louder alarm. Maybe my parents or whoever gifted it to me thought I'd be hung over all the time in college and would need a new supersonic alarm to get me out of bed and on my way to an 8 a.m. class on 3 hours of sleep. Anyway, long story short, I still use an alarm clock as opposed to my cell phone for my morning alarm. Now, if I'm not sleeping in my own bed, like I'm camping in a tent, sure, I'll use my cell phone as an alarm. But using my alarm clock as my alarm means one less thing I have to do on my phone. I've talked about this before, but I think generally people have 1 or 2 alarm clocks in their entire life. Go to your parents' house or your grandparents' house. The alarm clock on their nightstand is the same one from when you were born. It's got red digital numbers on it, fake wood paneling on the side, can barely get a clear reception for a local radio station. There's about 2 inches of dust on the top of it. Like the garage refrigerator, it will outlive everyone in your immediate family. I'll never forget going on vacation with my family in the 80s to Lake George, New York, something I've talked about before on the show. Settling down for the night in the same motel we stayed in every single year, and one of my parents making a call to the front desk to say, "I'd like a wake-up call for 8 a.m., please." Imagine that. Imagine the start of your entire day being at the mercy of someone having to pick up a phone and tell you to wake up. And this was back when they were obviously not using an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of this. Most likely you'd call and the person at the front desk would have a notepad with room numbers and what time they needed to be called. And overall, what a pain in the ass that must have been for the motel staff. I just picture the owner of the motel, who probably lived above the office, winding down for the night, maybe watching something they rented from Blockbuster, thinking, well, looks like no wake-up calls for tomorrow. Can't wait to sleep in. When suddenly the phone rings and he goes, shit. And it's room number 17 wanting a 5 a.m. wake-up call. Totally ruins their night. And now they have to wake up to make a phone call at 5 a.m. "This is your wake-up call," is what they would say. A very boring, soulless message to start your day. That's all I ever heard from a wake-up call person. "This is your wake-up call." Doesn't make me want to get out of bed. There's no urgency in that message, especially if you have to get up early to catch a flight. If I were a wake-up guy in the 80s, I would have blown an air horn straight into the phone. No words, just a big siren. Especially if it was an ultra-budget motel and it was my summer job. Or if they were completely rude from the start at check-in, I'd call them at 5 a.m. and yell, "Fire, fire, get out of the room!" Could you have requested 2 wake-up calls back then? Like if they called you, could you have said, "Call me back in 10 minutes"? Like your own personal snooze alarm. And the second time they call, you'd say, just give me like 5 more minutes. You call back again. Maybe that would have cost extra. Kind of like a 900 number back in the day. The first minute is free, but each additional minute is, $9.99. But wouldn't you believe it, there were actually 900 numbers you could call in the 80s and 90s that would give you a wake-up call. Yes, there were actual wake-up services back in the day that would call you and tell you to wake up. Doing a quick Google search, I couldn't really find an answer as to how much these things cost, but if you needed to call a 900 number to get out of bed, then you probably had something super important to be at. Like work, I guess? Wake-up services were a legit thing back in the 80s and 90s. In 2026, this completely fascinates me that this was a real job. This was a profession that employed human beings. And I would have loved to have read the job description for a wake-up hotline. This seemed like one of those as long as you have a pulse kind of jobs. Like qualifications. Must be good with numbers, including pushing them on a telephone. Must be awake. Must be able to say the phrase, "This is your wake-up call." Must not fall back asleep once awake for work. Like, did you have to go into an office for this? Was there some 30,000 square foot office space with 900 employees all making wake-up calls? Like your workspace would literally be a desk and a phone. A big old clunky phone in the middle of a desk and nothing else. Well, maybe a pad and paper with the calls you needed to make, but how could you slack off at work with just a desk with a phone? There was no computer solitaire happening. There was no Candy Crush happening. I've talked about this before on the show, but I can imagine productivity was through the roof before the internet. People would show up to work and worked, I guess. Like, there have always been office jobs where you do 15 minutes of actual work a week and then slack off the rest. But what did you do with that time before that? Now you can play games on your phone or browse the internet and fuel your anxiety for diseases you think you have, but will most likely never get. Back then, when your desk consisted of a pad and paper and a telephone, that sounds like hell. You'd actually have to work. Anyway, back to wake-up services. Were there competing companies? Like, how would one have chosen one wake-up service over another? Imagine your wake-up company, brilliantly titled Snooze You Lose Wake-Up Services, is doing well, then all of a sudden another wake-up service, a flashy and somewhat brilliantly titled Midnight Owls with a Z, moves in 2 blocks down the street. How do you keep your customers from switching services? Do they have a subscription plan? Was there a free gift when you signed up for a plan? Like a 3-pack of night lights? Maybe a cool phone, like one of those see-through ones? Like, we had alarm clocks back then. There were most likely alarm clocks in the motels we stayed in during the 80s and 90s. Why did we allow our flight out of town to hang in the balance of Carl at the front desk of a $50 a night motel? And what would happen if Carl overslept? What if Carl's alarm didn't go off, which caused a chain reaction of people missing important morning activities? What if Carl had a medical emergency in the middle of the night? I can't imagine he's being carted away in an ambulance, barely able to speak, being like, "Make sure the wake-up calls are made." I think in later years, wake-up calls were all computerized, but even then they were pretty irrelevant given we had alarm clocks and cell phones. What was the protocol if you were the person making the wake-up call and the guest in that room didn't answer? Did you just let it ring for a couple minutes? Did you go knock on their door or do a wellness check? Imagine having to wake up at 5 a.m. just to make one wake-up call at your motel, and you call, and the person on the other end goes, "Oh yeah, we've been up for like 30 minutes already." You'd be like, "Man, I could have slept in, for crying out loud." It's 2026, and I'm dying to know what would happen if I called the front desk of a hotel I'm staying at and asked for a wake-up call. What do you think they'd say? Would they just laugh and hang up? Is there still some archaic computer system they still use that's just collecting dust behind the desk, like an old fax machine? Or maybe a 5-star luxury hotel has some sort of service you can add on where an a cappella group of like 4 guys just busts into the room like, "Hello! Hello! Hello! Hello!" I'm wondering if there was a stark contrast between a budget motel wake-up call and a luxury resort wake-up call back in the day. Like, if I'm staying at the Plaza Hotel, would their wake-up consist of a really soft voice on the other end? Almost ASMR-ish, but not too hardcore as if to lull you back to sleep, but something like, "Good morning, sir. It's 7 o'clock, and it's a beautiful day here in New York City. The temperature is 71 degrees, and perfect for a stroll in Central Park." As opposed to a Red Roof Inn would be like, I love staying in hotels. I've always loved staying in hotels ever since I was a kid. And since my wife and I have had children, we've stayed in so many different hotels in different parts of the country. Some for a vacation, a lot for travel sports. One summer we spent roughly $1,800 on hotels alone for one season of travel softball between June and the beginning of August. As a kid, I always enjoyed going to hotels because it felt like an adventure. As an adult, I enjoy going to hotels because when I walk into the room is clean. It's empty. There's no dirty dishes that may have piled up. There's no laundry to fold. There's no cat vomit on the carpet. I simply have no responsibilities while staying in this room. And while it is empty and greatly reduces my anxiety because of the minimalistic space, it is quickly overtaken by luggage, clothing, and Dunkin' Donuts cups within about 30 minutes. And I've realized there are two groups of people who stay in hotels. One, the people who unpack and put their clothing in dresser drawers. Or two, they live out of their suitcase for the entire trip. It's interesting because I've gone back and forth on this over the last 10 years or so. If I'm staying somewhere for an extended period of time, I'm putting my clothes in the dresser drawer. If it's 1 or 2 nights, I'm living out of my suitcase. When I sit back and think about all of the places I used to stay as a kid, a lot of the motels my family stayed at, I think about how oblivious I was with regards to the overall condition of the room. They weren't terrible, but let's just say my kids got it pretty good when we stay overnight somewhere nowadays. They don't get stiff, dark-colored carpets like I did. They don't get a floral bedspread that was not washed along with the sheets from the previous guests like I did. I've already covered a lot of my motel experiences in previous episodes, but I haven't had that tried and true New England musty motel experience in quite a long time. It's nostalgic. Imagine if you were a child of the 80s and you stayed in roadside motels. Think about how many comforters you snuggled up with in those rooms that were not washed between guests. Yeah, not a good feeling. It's kind of like how, again, in a previous episode, I talked about how if we thought about who slept in the hotel bed before us, we would probably never want to sleep anywhere but in our own bed ever again. I have many friends that hate sleeping outside their own bed, and those same friends are the same ones who would drive an hour the opposite way just to use their own commode for a number 2. My father-in-law used to travel to Florida often to see my brother-in-law a couple times a year, and when he would do that, my wife or I would often drive him to and from the airport so he didn't have to park his car there. But one time he had a very early flight, so my wife and I paid for a hotel near the airport for him. The day before the flight, I drove him to the hotel sometime in the early evening and walked him into the lobby so he could get checked in. He explains he has a reservation. The attendant is checking him in, going over some information about the hotel. And as the attendant was confirming the type of room he booked, he said, "All right, and we've got 1 king bed for you guys tonight." And I paused before I said anything, and I thought, does this guy think we're a couple? He said, "A king bed for you guys." Now, not knowing who we were, this easily could have been one of those situations where this very much older man was a sugar daddy to this much younger man in his late 30s. Yet, if you took one look at my father-in-law and observed a sweat-stained Boston Red Sox baseball cap, ancient luggage that was probably made when Reagan was president, and a t-shirt where the structural threads were hanging on for dear life, you'd realize he wasn't so much of a sugar daddy, but more of a poor papa. I quickly spoke up and said, well, my father-in-law will be flying out tomorrow morning. Does he need to reserve a shuttle time? Again, for the attendant to say, "king bed for you guys," I still don't 100% know if that meant both of y'all are going to sleep in that bed, or we know you're dropping him off, but we want to be sure you're both okay with this accommodation. And while I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking, why can't I be normal and not have to overanalyze situations like this? Episodes ago, I talked about my generation, especially kids in the Northeast, have such nostalgia for roadside motels, their musty smells, floral bed sheets, and free HBO that seem to be the deal breaker when choosing a place to stay when near the ocean or a lake town in the summertime. But when you go to a motel or hotel today, there's something missing. A lot of the big chain hotels, they're nice, but they all seem somewhat sterile. Lots of grays, blacks, neutral tones. There's no flair, no color, no excitement in some of them. I was looking at some old photos of Disney's Polynesian resort from the 1980s. While the rooms have undergone many renovations since then, the rooms back then were such a vibe. Big floral prints on the comforter compared to plain white sheets of today, which I think is much better because, for one, you don't need a giant comforter in Florida, and two, I don't think they really ever washed the comforters with the bed sheets. Those old 80s rooms also had a 20-something inch CRT television, which is obviously not as dynamic as flat screen televisions of today. A big chunky rotary phone sat on the nightstand. Shag green carpet, which, much like the big floral print comforter, was probably kind of gross compared to the laminate hardwood of today's Disney resorts. But what if Disney set aside a dozen or so rooms and reimagined them to look like a hotel of the 1980s, but with modern conveniences, and set them at a premium price? Do you think people would go for that? The idea would be to create that feeling of vacations of yesteryear, feelings of nostalgia. They'd have to do it right, though, down to the smallest detail. Like, you could still have central air in the room, but you could have like a fake window air unit, like a window air conditioner that would have a custom mildew scent that would spray out about every 45 minutes. And maybe even every few hours, it would puff out the smell of cigarette smoke because, as I've mentioned many times on the show, everyone smoked in the 80s. And for us kids of the 80s, that smell is somewhat nostalgic. They could have a chunky old CRT television, but retrofit it with a flat screen TV inside of it. Kind of how people would take an old wooden television housing from the 80s and put a fish tank in it. Would people pay a premium to stay in one of these rooms? I think people in my generation would enjoy them, or there would be something about it that would trigger a childhood trauma. Like, oh, look, it's the same plaid pattern couch my alcoholic father would pass out on every night instead of reading me a story. Going back to cell phone addictions, I was thinking about how, before smartphones became a thing, there was a period of time when it was just okay to just not know something. Remember when you just didn't know something? Remember when you didn't have the answer to everything at your fingertips? Simple things like how to spell a word, especially if you don't have a dictionary in the house. I remember in 1999, I was at home, and I was preparing to finalize my application to community college. I was finalizing my application to community college because my grades in high school were so bad that I didn't get into other colleges I applied to. And I remember having all of my documents filled out, sealed in an envelope, ready to be put in the mail. All I had to do was write the address on the front of it. My problem was I couldn't remember how to spell the word community. Was it with one M? Two? One T? Two T's? I don't know. And I didn't want to open up the sealed envelope to see if one of the documents had the college's name on it, which it most likely did, because I didn't have another envelope and had to get it in the mail that day. And I was the only one home at the time. I looked all over my house and could not find a dictionary. I could have consulted the internet. However, I feel like there was either a problem with our computer or a problem with the internet at the time, and that wasn't an option. I was applying to community college and didn't know how to spell the word community. This was a time when I just didn't know. I didn't have knowledge at my fingertips. Now, I should have been disqualified from even attending community college because I couldn't even finish the application or spell one of the words in the school's name. Long story short, I was accepted. I mean, it's community college, so who doesn't get in? Went there for 2 years, finished my bachelor's degree at another school after 3 years, and earned a master's degree at another school. Again, I always tell people it was a modern miracle I went that far in school. I was 73rd out of 95 in my graduating class, academic-wise. I was always a little behind everyone else. But while I didn't do so well in high school, I did pretty okay in life. Anyway, back to the cell phone thing. Not only do we wake up and immediately look at our phone with nothing important we're really looking at, we often find ourselves on our phones, and if we're lucky, we catch ourselves going, what am I doing? I'm literally doing nothing on my phone right now. You doom scroll to the point you close Facebook, only to immediately reopen it, hoping to find another hit of dopamine, not realizing you just closed that app literally 3 seconds ago. Sometimes I wish I could go back to a dumb phone. A jitterbug with giant numbers that makes calls, can text, and maybe has Snake on it. Did you ever find yourself texting your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, or someone close in your life, something that definitely could have waited until you got home? How often do you find yourself texting them something in the middle of the day with something like, ugh, so tired today? Or, man, that 3 egg and cheese sandwich from the gas station is not sitting well this morning. Either of those things could definitely wait until we get home. But since we have a device that is a conduit for immediate communication between two people, we feel the need to throw out whatever is at the forefront of our mind. Imagine if this was 1993, you and your wife were both at work, and she, who works as a teacher, gets a call from the main office saying that you're on the phone and you need to talk to her. Confused, concerned, and thinking the worst, she heads to the main office, picks up the phone to hear your voice on the other end say, ugh, so tired today. And there would probably be a long pause followed by, yeah, and? And then you'd say, just wanted to let you know. And she'd say, why? I can remember when my sister and I were kids and we were home alone, and I'd need to tell my mom that I was going over to my friend's house. I'd have to call her at Friendly's restaurant where she worked. And I'd say, can I speak to Cheryl, please? And they'd say, yep, hold on. And then I'd hear them yell, Cheryl! I'd have to wait for her to get to the phone before I'd say, yeah, Ma, I'm going to Joe's house. And that whole scenario took a good 2 to 3 minutes to happen. Dialing the number, waiting for her to get to the phone, any follow-up questions from my mom, etc., as opposed to just sending a text message like today. My daughter is not allowed to use her phone at school, which is a school-wide policy, and there have been times where my wife or I will receive an email from her during the day with something like, can you ask Bopchi if she can pick me up after school so I don't have to take the bus? Bopchi is my mom. And so I'll ask my mom, and 99% of the time she says, of course. That's what grandparents are for, right? Now, I said to my sister one day, what do you think would happen if in 1997 I called Mom in the middle of the day at work and said, can you pick me up after school instead of taking the bus home? I can imagine the response would be the exact opposite of what my daughter would receive. It would be something along the lines of, "No, you take the bus home. I'm working." And she'd hang up immediately after. And I've told her that, and she gets a good laugh out of it. Maybe that's why a lot of relationships fall apart these days. Because people text each other boring texts all day that by the time they get home, they have nothing to talk about because they've already been sending texts for the last 8 hours. It's like the social media post thing I just talked about 5 minutes ago. So for lunch today, I had, I know, the roast beef on a hard roll, but you took one bite and realized you bought the Italian roast beef instead of the regular London broil and it was too much Italian seasoning for your liking. Yes, you told me this already. There are some days where I can't wait to get home and tell my wife something that either made me laugh hysterically, pissed me off royally, and everything in between at work. And there are times I'll text her something during the day like, "Remind me to tell you about how Carol undermined me again this morning." Or I'll text something like, "So I let out a huge fart in my office thinking no one was around when in reality there were a dozen people right outside my door." And that, I hope, will give her a good laugh during the day. Because we need that sometimes. That's the one good thing about cell phones and instant communication have given us. The ability to lift each other up during the day. Like a text that says, "Just want to let you know I love you so much," can mean the world to someone who is having a shit day. And you don't even know they were having a shit day. But sending that text just happened to be at the right time. I do think cell phones keep friendships tight, especially those who have people in a group that live all over the country or all over the world. Sending stupid memes to a group of 2 to 3 friends throughout the day is imperative to mental health for a couple of reasons. One, you get to laugh at various points in the day. And 2, you're socializing, which gets even more important the older you get. And that is the overall give and take with technology, I suppose. You're always connected, which can be good and bad. But as with any relationship, you cannot always be connected. You cannot always be connected with your spouse, and you cannot always be connected to your phone. Anyway, thanks for listening. This has been episode 31 of the Why Are We Still Doing This podcast. And if you'd like to write in, you can do so at whyarewestilldoingthispodcast@gmail.com. whyarewestilldoingthispodcast@gmail.com. If you like what you hear and you'd like to support the channel, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/whyarewestilldoingthis. That's buymeacoffee.com/whyarewestilldoingthis. Also, please follow me on TikTok at whyarewestilldoingthispc, all one word. Why are we still doing this PC on TikTok? And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody. Bye.